Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Discriminating Gamer. Say, here's an actual joke that was told by Germans in Nazi Germany toward the end of the war. Hitler, Goering, and Goebbels are on a ship at sea that's about to sink. Who is going to be saved? The answer? Germany. Ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to go ahead and take a look at 20 Axis and Allies games that I'd like to see. All right, ladies and gentlemen. So 20 Axis and Allies games that I'd like to see. Let me be very clear about what I'm doing. I'm going to have 20 games here that I'm going to discuss. These, of course, are not actual games. These are games I would like to see. And I'm not ranking them. I'm not going from 20 to 1. I'm just going to talk about these games that I'd like to see because Renegade Game Studios has the license to Axis and Allies, and of course they've reprinted a bunch of the old Axis and Allies games, and they've started to kind of expand in this idea of powered by Axis and Allies. And they did the Battle of the Arctic Circle, which was a G.I. Joe Axis and Allies game that I really enjoyed. They've done Battle of the Deep, which is kind of a fantasy underwater version of it, as well as new World War II titles like North Africa and the upcoming Stalingrad. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to talk about some of these Axis and Allies kind of themes that I would like to see in their games coming up. Now, I should point out, I'm going to start out talking about kind of basic World War II themes, and then I'm going to kind of branch out into some of these little bit more wilder themes, okay? The first thing I would like to bring up, the first Axis and Allies games I would like to see is what I would call a Europe map focus. Now, wait a second, Cody. What are you saying? They've already got Axis and Allies Europe. They got 2 editions of Axis and Allies Europe. They do. But what I mean here with a Europe map focus is this. The original first edition had like Germany as one province. And then when we get the second edition, Axis and Allies Europe Second Edition is a great game, but it's not really just Europe. Essentially, you've got Africa, all of Africa there. You've got the North and South America. You've got the North and South Atlantic. So it was built to be part of the global game that you could put together with Pacific, right? But what I would like to see with this Europe focus map is a map of Europe that breaks Germany and France and Italy and England into multiple provinces. So maybe have about 5 or 6 places in France, 7 or 8 places in Germany. Poland is 3 or 4. Really break it up and make it. I think this would make the game a little more operational in how it's played. And maybe you're looking at the core level, or I guess even division level. But I think that would be a lot of fun. I'd really like to see a map like that. And then along with that, my next one is a Pacific map focus. Again, this would probably look a little bit more like the first edition of AA Pacific. But again, I think you could even make more spaces on the board in the Pacific, have most of the islands have more than one space. I think that might be a fun way to play the game as well. So there's 2 of them right there. Next up, I would like to see AA Battle of Britain. Essentially, Battle of Britain would be primarily an AA game focusing on the air war. Now, you can have other units in there to an extent, certainly AA guns, what have you, but I'd like to see a game of AA that is primarily about, like I say, the air war. But it wouldn't just be fighters and bombers. You would have specific fighters and bombers, and maybe they would have unique characteristics that allowed them to do certain things. Maybe you could have a battle board where you have maneuvers or something like that. And I think that one would be awesome as well. Even bring the Navy into it. You can have the Luftwaffe bombing the Royal Navy and stuff. I think that one would be freaking awesome. So Battle of Britain, another great AA title I'd like to see. AA Battle of Berlin. I would like to see a battle, an AA game that was specifically about the end of the war with the Russians moving in toward Berlin. Maybe even a slightly bigger map where you can see the Western Allies closing in on Germany would be cool, but really something that's focusing in right at the end of the war. And maybe if you're the German player, you're just trying to hold them off. If you can hold them off for 20 turns or something like that, you win the game, right? That's the win condition, is holding them off long enough. I think Battle of Berlin would be awesome. Now we've got, of course, Stalingrad coming out. One of the games I would like to see is AA Barbarossa. So I would like to see kind of a grand invasion of Russia, just between the Soviet, the Red Army, and the Germans, and just kind of play out the game on the Eastern Front. Who knows? Maybe there could be some kind of a card mechanic to simulate what's going on in the West, to kind of maybe have shortages there for the Germans, or lend lease for the Soviets. Something, I don't know, but I think a grand Eastern Front game that encompasses more than just the Battle of Stalingrad, I think would be awesome. Although I haven't played Stalingrad yet, I'm looking forward to it. We'll see when that comes out, but a grand Barbarossa game. Okay, now we're moving away from just simple World War II. I'm going to be looking at other historical themes and some crazy out there themes. Number one is I'd like to see maybe an Axis and Allies medieval, right? A game set in medieval Europe with knights and archers and these sorts of units on the board. Again, you'd probably have to be a little bit more meat to it, maybe with some card play or something here. But I like that idea of kind of an Axis and Allies mechanic in medieval Europe, and maybe alliances and shifting alliances and stuff like that, I think might be a lot of fun. I'd like to see one about AA in the Russian Revolution. Now, the Russian Revolution, of course, led to a civil war between the Whites and the Reds. And this is where, of course, you'd have a lot of cavalry units, I would think. Very few mechanized units, largely infantry and cavalry with maybe some artillery units. But you've got, of course, the Bolsheviks trying to hold the center of Russia, while the various whites are attacking in kind of an uncoordinated fashion from the periphery against the center there. I think a Russian Revolution game would be awesome. And then you got to do the American Revolution, right? One that takes place with the British making landings up and down the American coast. Hessian mercenaries will come into play. And again, there'd have to be maybe some kind of political dynamic there too, but the basic war would be conducted with Axis and Allies type tactics and strategy. And maybe the British have these superior units, but they cost more. They take longer to get to America, whereas the Americans have inferior units, but maybe a lot more of them. So I think that would be a lot of fun as well. American Revolution. And then, of course, moving ahead of the Revolution, an AA U.S. Civil War game, right? Now, I think that would be a lot of fun. I know the American Civil War by Eagle Games kind of almost filled that niche, but not quite. I think an Axis and Allies games, again, where you've got infantry, cavalry, artillery as your primary units there, but maybe even certain elite units among those might work, like Jackson's Foot Cavalry. You could designate a unit for that, right? Stuff like that I think might be pretty fun. And then you've got the whole map of course, the eastern United States to play with there. That I think would be an amazing game if you could do it right. But again, you'd probably have to add another level, some political considerations like the Emancipation Proclamation, how that might affect the game, or European intervention. Maybe that's a win condition for the South. Who knows? But anyway, that I think that would be a lot of fun. Number 11, AA Napoleonics. Napoleonics. This would be awesome. A grand strategic game of Europe. I think you would probably have to make it a two-player and make it Britain versus Napoleon. And then all of the other countries are either allied to one or the other. And then certain conditions would force them to break alliances, betray Napoleon or whatever, and join the coalition. But I think, again, a game with that would be cool. Now, I remember, again, back in the day, Glenn Drover also did the Napoleon in Europe game from Eagle, which was awesome. But I think seeing it with an actual AA rule set here would be a lot of fun, right? Or even if you did have a multiplayer and give each of the players kind of their individual win conditions and things they have to do, like in Alliance, that might be fun as well. But AA Napoleonics would be great. My next one, we've already kind of been over this, but I want to see more in this universe. And this is, I loved G.I. Joe Battle for the Arctic Circle. I would love to see more Axis and Allies games with GI Joe. I'd like because GI Joe, of course, had so many great vehicles. That's one of the hallmarks of GI Joe. So I would love to see a GI Joe Axis and Allies game that takes place in a different battlefield, in a different particular storyline from GI Joe, where you have kind of specific weapons that we didn't see in Battle of the Arctic Circle. I would love to see it. I'm a big GI Joe fan, and I love Battle of the Arctic Circle. I'd like to see more of it. I'd like to see maybe an Axis and Allies steampunk game. Again, you could have a map in Europe, or you could have a global map, or even a made-up map, but just have steampunk units and a steampunk theme to it. Instead of bombers, you got dirigibles. Um, that sort of thing. I think would be a lot of fun. I like the idea. I think steampunk's a fun world to play in, and I think a GI Joe steampunk title would be awesome. Okay, now the next couple here are kind of do harken back to World War II, but they're kind of what if World War IIs. The first one here is AA Sea Lion. Essentially, Sea Lion was the proposed invasion of Great Britain by Nazi Germany. This is what they were preparing for in 1940 before Hitler decided to invade the Soviet Union. So I'd like to see a game that actually plays on that. What if Hitler in the spring of 41, decides he's going all in on England, and how that would play out? I would love to see an AA Sea Lion game. I love that alternate history counterfactual of that. And then along with that, the next one here is I would love to see AA Axis invasion of the United States. The Japanese coming in from the West Coast, the Germans and the Italians coming in from the East Coast. Of course, you got something similar to that in Fortress America. There was a game that came out years ago that I reviewed called America with a K, which kind of tread the same ground. I thought that was an okay game. I didn't love it, but it was fun. But I think you could do it again here and do it even better with specifically the Axis and Allies title. You can even make it a little more science fiction. Have some of the German super weapons they had on the drawing board. Bring them into it. I think it'll be fun. You could have it a dedicated 3-player game. One player's playing the Americans, one's the Japanese, one's the Germans, or you could do that as a 2-player. I think it'd be a lot of fun playing that on an American map, Axis and Allies. My next one would be one that is kind of has a science fiction theme on the planet Mars. Now, I think Mars would offer some interesting geography. You got Olympus Mons, the tallest mountain in the solar system. You've got the Mariner Valley, the longest canyon in the solar system. I think potentially there you make the science fiction version, and you've got some great geography to play with on Mars, and then you can bring in, deliveries from Earth or whatever. Anyway, I think that would be very fun. This next one is a game that is kind of kooky, but I think would be a lot of fun. Call it like AA Transylvania. And it would be in, again, Eastern Europe, and you have monsters. You have different factions, maybe led by Dracula or Frankenstein or the Mummy or whatever, and they each have kind of monster-specific units with them, and just a battle of the monsters. Maybe it could look something a little bit like Cthulhu Wars and how it plays, where they're trying to fulfill specific objectives, like the spell books from Cthulhu Wars. But I think that would be a lot of fun, and again, kind of kooky, kind of out there. AA Monsters be a very fun game I'd like to see. This next one is another one that I think would be a lot of fun, and it's one that I kind of touched on a little bit earlier. This is, again, an American map. I would like to see a U.S. Civil War 21st century, a modern Civil War. Now, I know it's pretty scary, and we've had a lot of speculation about that in the news. I'm not too worried, but I think that would be kind of a fun thing, and maybe a random setup where the different states could end up on different sides of the Civil War. It wasn't kind of like a set thing every time. Kind of move it beyond the blue state, red state dynamic, and actually have some, I don't know, make up some fake new political issues that are coming up, and then depending on setup, that's going to determine which states go to whom. I think that'd be a lot of fun. I'd love to see a modern game and how certain areas produce resources for the war effort. A lot of fun. So that's U.S. Civil War 21st century. And then, kind of building on this, I'd like to see an AA World War III. Make it a global map. Make it so that um, somehow nukes have been neutralized. There's some way where, or at least there can be limited nuke strikes, but you can't use a lot of nukes or something like that. But essentially, you're fighting a new world war around the world, and you could come up with aggressor nations. You can set it. Actually, you can set it. In 70 years from now or 50 years from now, where there's a real power dynamic, and some countries maybe have become more powerful, and they're leading their faction in a civil war. I think it would be a lot of fun having AA World War III and seeing kind of more modern or even slightly futuristic units fighting around the Earth. But number 2, that is to say, my next to the last one here, is already exists. I would like to see an Axis and Allies fantasy game. And I say it already exists, it's out of print, because Conquest of Nerath was this AA fantasy game. I love Conquest of Nerath. I bought it, I think, right before it went out of print, and I'm so glad I did. I haven't played it in a while, and I keep thinking I need to bring it to the table, because instead of bombers, you got dragons, You've also got, like, heroes that can go on quests, so it's not just the battling. But it's really good. It's got a fun board. It's a game that does not reward turtling. It's got a lot of the great Dungeons & Dragons tropes, but really fundamentally the combat system here is Axis and Allies. Conquest of Nerath was a great game. I would love to see that reprinted, or even a new Axis and Allies fantasy game is something I would love to see. Now, my last game here, my last Axis and Allies game that I'd like to see is probably the one I would like to see most. And it's one that I've thought about a long time. I've got rule sets in my head for how this game would work. But I would like to see an AA starship fleets. I would like to see Axis and Allies space opera. I would like to have planets. And planets would have ground units on them, but then you would also have spaceships that would travel around. Some of the planets would actually have kind of, stargates, so you could actually just go from some planets to other planets. But in other planets, you would need to have spaceships, take you to different places. And in this way, and again, it would not necessarily have a set map. You could kind of have a random setup, but this would kind of simulate with the Stargate's continents, right, and land movement. But each of the planets, maybe they have more than one space. It's not just you take the planet, you got to take, overall the planet there. But I like the idea of space battles, and I've always liked spaceship games, fleets on a map games, and I think this one would be a lot of fun. And I'd be fine with just kind of a generic space theme, but you could adapt something like this to Star Trek or Star Wars or an existing IP. I think that would be pretty cool. So that is my 20 AA games that I would like to see. The Powered by Axis and Allies idea, I think, is fantastic. I'm sure Renegade probably already has maybe some of these on the drawing board. I would love to see these. I'd love to be involved in producing some of these, because I got so many ideas, and I love Axis and Allies. I always have. So, ladies and gentlemen, what do you think? What AA games would you like to see in the future? Which ones on my list do you like? Which ones do you think are kind of dumb? I'd be interested to know what you think, so please leave a comment for us here on YouTube, on Board Game Geek, on our social media. Please like and subscribe to us here on The Discriminating Gamer. That means a lot to us. Please leave a thumb for us on Board Game Geek as well. I'd ask you, as always, please check out my other channel, Cody Carlson, PhD, where we talk about military history and books on history, fun stuff like that. I post some of my lectures on there as well. And I would also ask you, if you really do like what we do here on the channel, please click on the Super Thanks button and leave a tip. Now, let me ask you, what kind of shirt does a Panzer IV wear? A tank top. Please somebody help me on my feet again, and I don't know where I'm going, and I don't know where I've been. Please somebody help me on the solid ground. It's a Oh, yeah.
Held it with one dude.
Oh. Yeah, I know where you're going to be loading a crap load of people up.